Hi everyone, my name is Aaron and welcome back to my channel. This is going to be my attempt to do a comprehensive video addressing the question, where is Shelly Miscavige? This question comes up all of the time in the supporters of Leah Remini group on Facebook. It's probably the most often asked question, and it is also the question that gets into the most argumentation in the comments section, mainly between people who've never been in Scientology and people who have been in the Sea organization, even people who knew Shelly Miscavige and who worked with Shelly Miscavige. The interaction generally ranges from one end of the spectrum, from people who've never been in Scientology, asserting the likelihood or the probability that Shelly Miscavige is either dead, David Miscavige had her killed, or she's being held against her will in a dungeon somewhere in the mountains, to the other end of the spectrum of people who used to be in the Sea organization and are now out of Scientology, trying to provide some context for what's really going on with Shelly. What I'm going to try to do is provide basically a summary of the context that former Sea Org members are often trying to give in response to this question, so that it's not having to play itself out over a series of like 100 or 200 comments in a thread, which is a very unproductive way to have a conversation about anything really. When the show first aired, we created the Supporters of Leah Remini group to be a platform where people who were watching the show could actually ask questions to the individuals who were on the show. So all the moderators and the admins in the Supporters of Leah Remini group are people who were contributors to the show. And there are a ton of former Scientologists in the group, a ton of former Sea Org members in the group who are available to answer people's questions. And that's why we thought it would be an interesting group to have. There's now almost 35,000 people, or at least over 30,000 people in the group. So there are arguably more people in the Supporters of Leah Remini group on Facebook than there are Scientologists in the entire world, which is pretty funny to me. I think there's a misunderstanding on the part of a lot of people who watch the show, or maybe just read articles about Shelly being missing. A misunderstanding that Shelly was a public figure. And I think I know where this misunderstanding has come from. And it comes from the difference in the culture that exists in the Sea organization and the culture that exists pretty much anywhere else in the real world. So in the Sea organization, being someone's spouse does not have any meaning or significance. So like, for example, if you're the president of the United States, the first lady is, by the nature of being the spouse of the president, a public figure. If you are the spouse of the CEO of a high-profile company, you would be reasonably be expected to attend functions with your spouse. That's the culture of the real world. One's spouse is generally expected to be seen with one at public events. And as we know, and as we've heard from Leah Remini and others, there was an extended period of time where Shelly was always seen with her husband, David Miscavige, who is the head of Scientology. What I think gets misunderstood is why she was seen with David Miscavige, because based on the culture of the real world, it would be common sense to assume that one of the reasons she was seen with David all the time is because she was his spouse. But in the culture of Scientology, particularly the culture of the Sea organization, that's just not anything that factored into it. So David Miscavige's position in Scientology is called Chairman of the Board, Religious Technology Center, or COB-RTC. And for a very long period of time, Shelly's post, her job in the Sea Org, was COB's assistant. And the fact is, the only reason Shelly was ever even in a position to be mistaken for a public figure is because she was his assistant, not because she was his wife. The truth is, Shelly was never a public figure at all. If you ever ran into COB and his entourage, you would also have ran into Shelly, but you wouldn't have been introduced to her. You wouldn't have been, it would never be, oh, this is my wife, Shelly. And it's not really customary in the Sea Org to introduce people to anybody. If you run into David Miscavige, he doesn't introduce you to his entourage. If David Miscavige was up on stage addressing all of the Scientologists of the world, it's not like Shelly was standing next to him, the way the First Lady might be. Shelly herself was never a public figure. She never addressed Scientologists. I mean, in my 30 plus years in Scientology, I think I laid eyes on Shelly once or twice. And I didn't even actually know who she was. So this is sort of to make the point that Scientologists do not wonder where Shelly Miscavige is. I would bet 95% or more of Scientologists would not even be able to pick Shelly Miscavige out of a lineup. I bet 95% or more Scientologists wouldn't even be able to tell you the name of David Miscavige's wife. It's just not a thing. The only Scientologists who had a personal or working relationship with Shelly Miscavige would be Scientologists who worked at Scientology's international base in Riverside County outside of Hemet, California. Super confidential base. That is the base that Shelly Miscavige, David Miscavige, and RTC, the organization Miscavige is the head of. That is where RTC's offices are located, is on the INT base. And when you hear former Sea Org members talking about having known Shelly, the only former Sea Org members who would be able to say that are people who also worked at Scientology's INT base, which I never worked at, for example. To the normal world, this cultural aspect in the Sea Org of spouses not having any particular significance is a strange one. It is perfectly common for spouses to be separated for years at a time, just strictly due to assignment of job duties. The Sea Org shows no concern whatsoever for spousal marital relationships. Shelly's ability to even respond to Leah in a friendly way or to maintain some sort of a familiar, friendly relationship with Leah was really a privilege afforded to Shelly because of her professional assistant capacity to David Miscavige, is because it's actually against the rules of the Sea Organization to maintain friendly relationships with public Scientologists, even celebrities. It's called fraternizing with the public, and it's something you can get into a lot of trouble for. The only reason Shelly was ever even able or allowed to be friends or to have a friendly relationship with Leah is because she was David Miscavige's assistant. And the moment Shelly was removed from her post by Dave as his assistant, she immediately would have lost any privilege to have any communication with public Scientologists at all, much less an overly friendly one. I think another reason that former Scientologists and former Sea Org members respond sometimes very bluntly or harshly to non-Scientologists that are so convinced that Shelly is dead, or particularly that Dave had Shelly killed, is because Scientology's history of harassing people actually tends to prove that Scientology doesn't have people killed. I know it's very easy to believe that a tyrannical sociopath like David Miscavige would not hesitate to have someone killed, but the evidence actually indicates the opposite. Mary Sue Hubbard is evidence that Miscavige does not have people killed. Pat Broker is evidence that Miscavige, or Scientology in general, but Miscavige is what we're talking about. Miscavige would not have someone killed. Paulette Cooper is an example of how Miscavige and those who preceded him, I guess LRH, but anyone else who was particularly in charge of various operations before Miscavige, does not have people killed. Gabe Cesaris, the former mayor of Clearwater, is evidence that Scientology does not order people to be killed. The amount of harassment and following and really convoluted and complex operations that Scientology will orchestrate to interfere with people's lives. I mean, Paulette Cooper is probably the most severe, the worst example of the lengths Scientology will go to mess with someone. If Scientology were going to have someone killed, they wouldn't spend the tens of millions of dollars and the years and years and years they have spent harassing various people, when it would be so much easier to have them killed. So let's take a look at some excerpts from the Where is Shelly episode of the Scientology in the Aftermath show.
So after Tom Cruise's wedding, I was punished for asking where the leader's wife was. I'm asking where Shelly Miscavige is because I knew Shelly, because I considered Shelly a friend. Look, I have correspondence from Shelly going back to 2003.
I wonder what the significance is of Leah saying that she has this written correspondence going back to 2003. I wonder if that means she just couldn't find anything prior to 2003, because 2003 is a lot more recent than I would have expected. Like, I was aware of who Shelly Miscavige was and what her post was as early as 1994. I even have a photo I took that has Shelly Miscavige in it around 1996. Tom Cruise's wedding, which is the first time Shelly's absence was noted, that's where Leah, asked where's Shelly, was in 2006. Are we to take away from this that maybe Leah only started getting friendly with Shelly in 2003. Does this mean she was only in touch with Shelly for a few years before Tom's wedding? But again, I do believe that the fact that all this correspondence is in writing tends to be an indicator that Shelly was never someone who was supposed to be reachable. All right, let's see another clip.
I mean, she would always write you back right away. So I start writing Shelly letters again. Going, hey, haven't heard from you, you know, and I'm never getting a response back. So it is really out of character for somebody like Shelly to not write me back.
So in this segment, we see Leah writing letters to Shelly expressing concern. There is a 0% chance that Shelly Miscavige received any of those letters. There's another thing that's commonplace in the Sea organization that to the regular world, it would be absolutely just seen as insane. There is no privacy in mail correspondence in the Sea Org. Every piece of correspondence sent to, received by a Sea Org member is opened up and read by someone in the organization before it is forwarded to the intended recipient. Bank statements, credit card statements, birthday cards, everything. You are not allowed to receive personal communications through the organization without it being opened and read by someone in security or other parts of the organization I won't bother naming. And that's just considered standard operating procedure. And any communication that is perceived to be troublesome or perhaps upsetting or perhaps critical of the organization is tossed right in the trash. There's no way Shelly Miscavige received any of Leah's letters asking where she is, expressing concern. 0% chance. And so again, this is an example where in the regular world, a lack of response to communications expressing such concern would understandably be met with grave concern and would understandably lead to assumptions that maybe this person is dead or maybe this person is being held against their will. Whereas in the Sea organization, you're kind of like, no, it doesn't indicate that. It indicates those messages were intercepted and thrown in the trash. That's what it indicates. Because a public Scientologist isn't allowed to express concern about a Sea Org member. The Sea Org doesn't answer to public Scientologists, not even celebrities. No one in the Sea Org is going to try to put a public Scientologist's mind at ease over concern about a Sea Org member. Like, it's just not done. And again, I do understand how crazy these things sound. But this is being provided to give the context on why you don't see former Sea Org members actually wondering if Shelly's dead or okay. Because these things are totally normal in the Sea Org. All right, let's watch another clip.
As time went on, I started to see reports of other people leaving, other executives leaving and talking about abuse. And now I'm wondering, is Shelly dealing with this herself? After hearing nothing from Shelly, after 6 years, I said, this is enough. So I did what I felt I had to do, which was file a police report.
So Leah says she filed the missing persons report in 2013 after not hearing from Shelly for 6 years. Tom Cruise's wedding was in November 2016. So I do believe that this all points to the fact that Tom Cruise's wedding is the first time that Shelly Miscavige's absence was noted, or at least noted by Leah. And we also know that her absence from that wedding, we know from subsequent reporting that has been done, was due to her having gotten in trouble with Dave for, not even worth getting into the details right now, but basically there was a disagreement and a misunderstanding and Dave got pissed at Shelly and he removed Shelly from her post. So this is just the first time it becomes publicly evident that her being removed from her post as COB's assistant then results in her not traveling with Dave, even to something as important as Tom Cruise's wedding. But again, this goes back to the cultural thing. There were other Scientology executives who were at that wedding who were there without their wives. I think we heard a story of Norman Starkey getting drunk at the wedding and hitting on Brooke Shields. You can fact check me on that. I'm almost positive that's a story that we've heard. Norman Starkey's married. So in none of the stories that I've heard about Tom's wedding, In none of the stories have I heard that any of these executives were there with their spouses. I'll have to follow up on that and see if that's true. But I believe it is true. In my experience, it would be true. Spouses simply do not travel with each other unless it's actually required based on the post duties of both spouses. All right, let's watch another clip.
ABC News confirming that Remini filed a missing persons report with the Los Angeles Police Department on the wife of the man who runs the Church of Scientology, David Miscavige.
Okay, so we see there that the Los Angeles police do say that they made contact with Shelly after Leah filed her missing persons report. Leah does not dispute that the police actually made contact with Shelly after she filed her report. What she disputes is that when she asked the police if they had met with Shelly privately or in the presence of other Sea Org members, the police declined to share that information with her. Leah's objection to what happened was that Leah believes Shelly should have been met with privately, so that if she really wanted to leave, she would have perhaps felt safe enough to do so. And that concern is understandable. But again, this is a point where in the comment thread of posts about Shelly, people seem to be under the impression that the police didn't actually see Shelly or make contact with her. They're under the impression that Leah doesn't believe that they did. Leah has never said she doesn't believe the police made contact with Shelly. And then Shelly was seen in 2007 at a funeral for a family member and has not been seen in public since. And this is again where the culture of Scientology and this Sea Org is pretty much completely incompatible with the culture of the regular world. And people go, it's just not normal for somebody not to be seen for that long. People who work at international management are not supposed to be seen. They would normally never be seen by anybody other than the people that they work with at the international base. And we know even from this episode of the Where is Shelly episode on the Aftermath program, that those who would know say Shelly was transferred to work at one of the CST bases. The CST bases are the most confidential bases in Scientology. Nobody would ever be seen who works on these bases. And with CST being as high level and confidential of an organization as it is, and with these bases being as remote and secure as they are, you would never expect to see any of these people. All right, let's see another clip.
You know, I've known Janis since 1973, and she and Shelly, their focus and their life was devoted to L. Ron Hubbard and nothing else. Janis was one of the original Commodore's messengers with Shelly on board the Apollo. He was grooming them to be the elite of Scientology. Janis and Shelly were two of the original L. Ron Hubbard Commodore's messengers. I too became an L. Ron Hubbard Commodore's messenger who worked directly with Hubbard.
I went to the ship in January of '68, and in 1970, Clarice showed up, Shelly's older sister. So we already knew each other, and then a couple years later, Shelly showed up, and she was like 12 years old.
For dedicated Scientologists, having your child join the Sea Organization is the greatest honor that there is. Children were turned over by their parents to the care of the Sea Organization exclusively. Back then, you could send someone as young as 12 or even younger, and that's exactly what happened to Shelly.
The only parental type of attention that we got was from Hubbard himself, because that's who we saw every day and related with.
This thing of L. Ron Hubbard basically having been a surrogate father for Shelly is actually very, very important in understanding not only her mindset, but the mindset of a lot of the other people at the INT bases and the CST bases who have stuck around through everything, through all the abuse, through all the demeaning mistreatment. This speaks to what it means to be a true believer. And this is actually one of the things that personally bothers me when I see people assuming Shelly's being held in a dungeon against her will. Everything we have heard about Shelly Miscavige indicates that she is a true believer, not only in L. Ron Hubbard, but also in Scientology as a subject, what she would call the tech. She's a full believer in the state of full operating Thetan. She's a full believer in Scientology's bridge to total freedom. So if we are to believe that Shelly's a true believer in the cause, and even a believer that L. Ron Hubbard will be coming back and it's her responsibility to still be there when he comes back, are we to believe that Shelly is so shallow that all it would take is for her husband to remove her from her post as his assistant, and she would all of a sudden stop believing in everything she had believed up to that point? So are we to believe that the only reason Shelly Miscavige stayed in Scientology for so long, stayed in the Sea Organization for so long, was because she got to be her husband's assistant? Like, no. Nothing we've heard about Shelly Miscavige indicates that those things would be true. So the very idea that when she was her husband's assistant, she was there willingly and a good soldier and a true believer, but then she gets removed from her post, she gets reassigned to work at another base, and all of a sudden she's a prisoner? All of a sudden she's being held against her will. All of a sudden she needs to be rescued. See, these things don't make sense. If she was a true believer when she was Miscavige's assistant, she can reasonably be expected to still be a true believer now, which means she wasn't someone who felt she needed rescuing or needed rescuing before. There's really no reason for us to assume that she would feel that way now. And that's kind of the culture clash that ends up occurring in the Facebook comments, is people trying to provide context that Shelly is a true believer. And that even if her crazy husband did hire armed security to babysit the gate of the base that she's at, that's probably more of a reflection of her husband being a frickin' sociopath than it is a reflection on Shelly's own state of mind. And that's really all this video is trying to do, is to provide that context, not to make any of Miscavige's behavior okay, not to normalize any of this crazy culture that exists in the Sea Org, but to provide the context to understand the difference in how former Sea Org members process this information about Shelly compared to how people who've never been in Scientology process the information. I hope that makes sense. All right, let's watch another clip.
Why do you think you are here and Shelly isn't?
She doesn't know anything else.
So you believe she's well?
I don't know. She might be dead. I don't know. But
That's the point. Nobody does know.
Nobody knows. But I've heard rumors that she was sent to CST, Church of Spiritual Technology, and I've heard that's where she is.
Understand, as a Scientologist, like, I didn't even know gold existed, right? Like, I'm going through my Scientology career and I hear about this secret base called Golden Era Production. You know, I didn't even know that existed. Now I'm hearing another level of some crazy called CST.
This is a great quote from Leah, because even someone, a high level, however you want to describe high level in Scientology, a celebrity who had done her OT levels, who was on a friendly basis with Shelly Miscavige, even Leah says she had no idea of the existence of or the location of the INT base. Golden Era Productions and the INT base are, Golden Era Productions is a film studio located on the INT base. So when she says she didn't know about the existence of Golden Era Productions or where it was, she's referring to the INT base. So Leah, not even Leah, knew where the INT base was, much less even knew of the existence of these CST bases. Even people who've worked at the INT base for 30 years, unless they're at CST, unless they are posted at CST, they do not know the location of the CST bases. So I feel like that sort of factors into the overall context of no one's seen Shelly. Are you kidding me? The most dedicated Sea Org members in the world don't even know the location of the base where Shelly's at. That is how confidential and closely held information about these bases are within the world of Scientology. And by the way, that is not to mean that these bases are used as like, prison islands or something. These bases, the Sea Org members manning these bases are the most highly qualified Sea Org members in all of Scientology. Being posted at CST is not a punishment. It is one of the highest promotions you can get. And this is something I'm not sure the members of the real world understand. They see photos of the bases, they see the fences that are around them, and they think, oh, these must be like prisons. Well, they might have security similar to the security you would have at a prison. But remember, security works both ways. It can keep people from getting out. It can keep people from getting in. I can tell you from a Scientology perspective, the security at those bases is prevented to keep people from getting in. That doesn't mean Miscavige didn't send Shelly there so that she can be as far away from any other Sea Org members and Scientologists as possible. Both of these things can be true at the same time. If Shelly is there as a punishment, she's the only one. You do not get punished by being promoted to CST. So in some respects, you could say that Shelly didn't even get demoted. She got transferred from RTC to CST. And in other respects, and I do believe this to be the case, that David Miscavige transferred her there because it was also an extremely convenient way of giving her as little connection as possible to as many other Sea Org members as possible. But it doesn't mean Shelly doesn't want to be there. Do you see where I'm going with this? Just because she's there, just because there's a fence around the place, just because there's private security guarding the place, doesn't mean she doesn't want to be there. And I think this gets covered a little later in the episode. So let's watch another clip.
So we want to hear like your perspective about her. What was it that caused her to be disappeared in the way that she has been disappeared?
Yeah, and I'm surprised it didn't happen way earlier, personally. But I mean, how did she last that long? The relationship was more she'll be assistant, not Shelly, my wife.
Shelly Miscavige would be penalized for questioning David Miscavige, just as any Sea Org member would be penalized for questioning, having the balls to question David Miscavige. So that needs to be very clear, because you're sitting at home, a wife, going, you know, hey, if my husband was the head of a corporation, a business, the president of the United States, when he got home, we wives know, we'd be like, hey, what the are you doing with this country? You need to knock that off. Like, I'm not down with that. And the same with a wife of a very powerful husband. That is not the case here.
So here you have Leah acknowledging that Shelly would be treated just the same as any other Sea Org member, not getting any special treatment due to the fact of being Dave's wife. Okay, let's watch some more clips.
There were wild things that happened, like yelling and screaming and throwing water and bringing in a fire hose and wetting the place down, just crazy stuff. Shelly was pretty quiet about all that, in fact.
She was always standing like a few feet back and had the demeanor of, I wish I wasn't here.
You, Mike, me, all the guys that got close to Miscavige at one point or another couldn't take it anymore. She lasted forever, but nobody could stand it. You know what I mean? And really, if you look at the history of it, so many people dropped off. She just kept going. And I say that because I had conversations with her where I knew she didn't think much differently than you and I did.
Well, what did she think?
I think that she knew the guy, David Miscavige, was a nut.
Right.
I bet you she did something to be forced to go away. You have to decide at some point, I'm not doing this anymore. And at that point,
she would do what?
Express that she disagrees. I don't think Miscavige made her disappear. I think she had a lot to do with it.
I see what you're saying. You're saying you think she disagreed with him, and that's why she is where she is.
Miscavige said he removed me, Mike, everybody else. He didn't. At some point, we went this.
Right.
And he knew we were saying this. And I think Shelly probably did the same thing.
Okay, so Tom DeVocht nails it right here. He's speaking of the fact that it is so goddamn miserable working for David Miscavige that Shelly is just as likely or more likely to have orchestrated her removal as his assistant so that she could get some relief from that psychotic experience of having to deal with him on a daily basis. That Shelly was more likely to have orchestrated something like that than Miscavige was to have initiated it. And I think that really nails it and speaks exactly to what I'm trying to explain, which is the lack of particular concern for Shelly's well-being. None of these facts would indicate to a former Sea Org member that Shelly is in some kind of danger. And that really is at the heart of the issue when I say former Sea Org members process these facts differently than normal people in the normal world. All right, let's watch another clip.
I can't explain why she didn't crack earlier or disappear earlier, or I think that maybe it had to be her belief in Hubbard?
Yes, we know that she's very loyal to L. Ron Hubbard because I think she considered L. Ron Hubbard her father, being that she was dropped off into the Sea Org so young.
And I'll tell you why I say that. Norman Starkey. This is a guy that everybody looked up to at one point because he was the captain of the Apollo, the ship. And I talked to that guy one time, and said, "Do you know what's going on?" I mean, with David, and he goes, "I know, but I'm waiting for Hubbard to get back."
There was a lot of people there, Leah, that believe that.
This is the guy, the toughest mother in the Sea Org.
I never even considered this.
This is very real.
They think he's coming back. And it's so easy to say, "You crazy mother." It's so easy to say, "You're crazy as." But at the end of the day, if you go back to the indoctrination of thinking that L. Ron Hubbard is a savior of mankind, or that he's your father, you're going to do everything to protect it. They don't believe in David Miscavige, but they believe in L. Ron Hubbard, and they're waiting for his return. And if she's alive and well, Shelly Miscavige believes that, I think.
Okay, so Tom here acknowledges that Shelly would be one of those people who believes LRH is coming back, L. Ron Hubbard is coming back, has a loyalty to L. Ron Hubbard, believes in the mission of Scientology, believes in L. Ron Hubbard's vision for Scientology and for the world, and would be dedicated enough to want to put up with whatever she has to put up with to still be there when LRH comes back. Well, you can't really have it both ways. You can't say she's there because she wants to be and say she's being held against her will. And that, again, is at the heart of this issue. Former Sea Org members, you will not hear former Sea Org members say that she's being held against her will, because that's just not how the Sea organization works. Yes, when you get in trouble and there's like an acute problem and people are worried you're going to dip, you're going to blow, you're going to go AWOL, you'll be put under watch, you'll have people assigned to you, you'll have people sleeping outside your bedroom door. They'll make it impossible for you to leave. But the way this works in the world of Scientology is they keep you there until they can handle you, until you decide you don't want to leave. And once they're convinced you don't want to leave, then you're back to being sort of a normal person with normal rights and normal privileges, whatever those rights and privileges may be, depending on which organization you're at and things like that. Now, again, normal people in the normal world watching this video are going to go, "Don't you realize how fucking crazy that is?" And I go, yes, I absolutely realize how crazy that is. I've been through it myself a million times. And from having gone through it myself, I can tell you that when you come out the other end, you definitely still want to be there. You definitely have changed your mind and have rededicated yourself to the cause and no longer want to leave. I'm not saying that's healthy. I'm not saying that's good or natural. I'm saying eventually we cannot really 10, 13, 15 years later still be acting like Shelly's being held in a dungeon against her will. It's not how Scientology works. It's not how the Sea Org works. And even what Tom is saying here speaks to that. All right, let's watch another clip.
I saw Mark Yeager, Mark Ingber, Gillham, Reserve, Ray Midoff get the kicked out of him. These are guys that were top dogs they were his favorite punching bags, physically and mentally. So these guys, Mark Yeager, Mark Ingber, Gillham, Ray Midoff, these guys got that amount of abuse. They're still there. And I think it's that belief that Hubbard's coming back, or that's the only thing I can make of it.
Yeah.
And I think that Shelly might be the same thing.
All right, so Tom mentions all these other senior executives who experienced chronic and severe physical abuse from David Miscavige, which, by the way, Shelly Miscavige never did experience that stuff, okay? So he's referring to these other senior executives who did, and they're still there. And they haven't been seen in public. And nobody's heard from them. And you don't hear anybody speculating that those guys are being physically held somewhere against their will. And this, again, is a perfect example and speaks right to the heart of the issue of why former Sea Org members don't express any particular concern about Shelly. Because she's just another Sea Org member. There's no reason to expect her circumstances to be different than anybody else's. There's no reason to expect her motivations to be different from anybody else's. She's as much of a true believer as all these other guys are. And if we are to say that those other guys are still there because they believe in the mission and they believe in L. Ron Hubbard's vision and they want to be there when Hubbard gets back, then we have to say the same thing about Shelly. We can't say Shelly's some special extra victim because, why, she's Dave's wife? Why, she's a woman? Like, what are the reasons that we make these exceptions that somehow Shelly's circumstances are worse off than anyone else's? And that's why you won't see former Sea Org members making that assumption. All right, let's watch another clip.
Why do you think that no one has done anything about this?
The FBI said, okay, would you help us on a raid? Absolutely. And I think it's a waste of time. And she goes, everybody said that. Everybody's told me the same thing. Why? And I said, they're believers. They are, you're going to walk in there, they're all going to go, hey, we're doing this on our own accord. The guys that are in there, you're going to get the occasional, one that blows you out of there every once in a while, but that's why it's a cult.
There's one other thing that has circulated online, information about Shelly that tends to get people concerned about her well-being, and that's an anecdote that's reported on Tony Ortega's blog about someone who thinks they saw Shelly downtown in a shopping district in the company of two big men who were to, I guess, believe are guarding her or something. Here's an excerpt. She was a thin, smaller woman escorted by two men, disheveled, almost like a drug addict or like she was homeless. The woman, her name's Rachel, who believes she saw Shelly, says Shelly looked all of her 55 years, had long, stringy graying hair, and appeared frail. The two men with her looked younger. Rachel estimates they were in their 30s. They seemed to be leading her like you would someone who was under the influence of drugs or alcohol. It was awkward. Oh, and then 4 months later, the same woman, Rachel, thinks she saw, this was around 2016, saw Shelly again at a shopping place called Goodwin & Sons Market, a few blocks away from the hardware store where she had seen her previously. The same woman came in, escorted by two younger men. The woman had the same kind of appearance as the previous time, but Rachel didn't notice if it was the same two young men. So here's the thing. First of all, the idea that someone who's never been in Scientology would recognize Shelly Miscavige from a 25-year-old photo is questionable to me at best. But one of the other things that's, I think, just being generally misunderstood here is that if Shelly Miscavige were in any sort of trouble internally, if she was considered in trouble, if she was considered a risk, if she was considered to be unhappy in the eyes of anybody, if she was very sick, if she was very frail, she would never in a million years be allowed off of the base. There is no reason for Shelly Miscavige in a sick, ill, or frail condition, much less if she's still in trouble or wanting to leave. There's no reason at all for her to be allowed off the base just to go do some shopping. You think there aren't 100 people that would be sent out to go do shopping for Shelly Miscavige? And this is also in the context of reporting that, there's armed security specifically posted out front of the base to prevent Shelly from leaving. Well, you can't really have it both ways here either. You can't say that Miscavige hires armed people to guard the gates to prevent Shelly from leaving, but if she wants to go shopping downtown, we'll just send her out with a couple guys. That's just not how the Sea Org works. I think it's already been proven on the show and from other sources that there is a security force posted outside of the CST base to watch the entrance of the base. And it's totally reasonable to conclude that Shelly Miscavige could be one of the reasons those guards are posted there. Totally reasonable to assume that. I would attribute that more to just the psychotic nature of David Miscavige than I would more to Shelly's desire to escape. But you can't say that Miscavige is so paranoid about Shelly escaping from the base that he's going to hire armed security to prevent her from leaving, but he's going to let a couple guys escort her to a store downtown to do some shopping, where she could throw a fit, she could attract the attention of anyone, she could do anything. Like you're someone that really wants to escape, you let them get into public, you let them get into a shopping store. I don't care if you've got 5 people accompanying her. It would be very easy to make a scene, get the police called, fake a heart attack, get an ambulance called. Like, this is why I really dismiss this report that, first of all, anyone would have even recognized Shelly Miscavige, much less that she would have been seen in a very frail, ill, or compromised condition. But again, I think it gets misinterpreted. Even if she were, in fact, seen downtown, it would mean that she was considered okay now. It would mean that she was back to the state of mind where she was more than happy to remain in the Sea Org, more than happy to keep doing her job and get the show on the road. And yet this incident of her allegedly being seen downtown is reported as something alarming. When in the world of Scientology, if she had been seen, actually had been at this hardware store, it would be the opposite of that. It would be the opposite of alarming. Other than the fact of if she was actually very sick or ill. But the thing that's very weird about this report is they don't just say she looked sick or ill. They say she was acting like she was on drugs or something. Shelly Miscavige is not being allowed out in public under some inebriated, either through drugs or alcohol condition that's going to act her to act erratically or weird. Like, that's just not, this is not how the Sea organization works. So that's just something else that floats around there when former Sea Org members try to provide some context about Shelly and her circumstances and her likely circumstances, and people go, oh, but she was seen under, she was seen being watched by these two guys and she looked like she was, not well and on drugs. They must be drugging her to control her. It's like, this group, this Facebook group was created so that people who actually do know what they're talking about, former Scientologists, former Sea Org members, former people who worked with Shelly Miscavige, former people from the INT base, could answer questions in a true and honest way. I guess that's why it is frustrating sometimes when people who don't know the culture of Scientology, don't know the culture of the Sea Org, insist that Shelly is being held in a dungeon against her will, being drugged and all this kind of stuff. So anyway, I think you get the idea. I hope the purpose of this video isn't to be like, hey, nobody should try to find out where Shelly is. Or, I mean, nobody should try to let Shelly know that there's help available. I mean, look, I help run the Aftermath Foundation. We help people that are escaping the Sea Org and escaping Scientology. We know for a fact that if the people who are in the Sea Org, who do not have the money, family, or friends or support network to leave, if they knew there was help available, a good chunk of these guys would leave. Because we know that because once they do find out there is help available, many of them do choose to leave. And thankfully, the Aftermath Foundation is there to help such people do just that. So none of this is intended to mean that people should stop trying to let Shelly know that help is available. It would be wonderful. In fact, that was Leah's biggest beef with how the LAPD handled the missing persons report. Leah wanted Shelly to be able to get the message, Shelly, if you're not happy with what you're doing, if you're not happy where you are, you can leave with me right now and I will take care of you completely. And I think Leah has all the right in the world to want to give that communication. And I wish Leah had the ability to get that communication to Shelly. But the fact that she isn't, it's unfortunate and it sucks, but it doesn't imply a greater danger. And it doesn't, there's nothing, none of the facts surrounding all this should be interpreted. I don't believe these facts should be interpreted to mean that Shelly's circumstances are particularly worse than anyone else at the INT base or the CST bases. And I'm sure once I edit this video, there'll be a million things I wish I had remembered to say and didn't get a chance to, but I'm gonna leave it at that. Thank you guys so much for watching. For those of you who watched until the very end, thank you very much, and I will talk to you guys soon. Bye. I wanna give a big thank you to the sponsor of today's video, Dream Realty. Oh wait, that's me. I've been a real estate investor for over 20 years. For the last 15 years, I've been buying and selling my own properties all over Clearwater and Tampa Bay. If you're looking to buy a home or sell a home, and you'd like to work with me, get in touch, and I'll get it done for you. Thanks again to everyone who supports this channel, and thank you for watching.